Hello everyone, in this module we will be learning about JavaScript. JavaScript was initially created to make web pages alive. JavaScript is a scripting or a programming language that allows you to implement complex functions on web pages. Every time a web page does more than just sitting there and displaying static information, you can bet that JavaScript is probably working in background. JavaScript is a programming language for the web, like C++ is for low latency systems where precision and high speed are very important. Like Python is for backend on servers. Similarly, we have JavaScript for the web pages. JavaScript can update and change both HTML and CSS present on a web page. Like we have a dark mode in YouTube. In just one click, we can change the style of whole page. JavaScript can calculate, manipulate, and validate data. Like when we try to log into our account and the website needs to know if the password entered is correct or not. Let's get into more details about JavaScript and the data variables in the JavaScript. Let's start by looking different type of variables in a JavaScript. To manipulate data on website, we need to know how many data types are in JavaScript first. So we have a string variable in a JavaScript which can store the whole string as a piece of information. The another is a number variable which can take any form of number. It can either be a float or an integer. And to process the Boolean logic, we can save data as true or false inside a Boolean variable. And operators, there is something special in them. They are just a function that can take one or more argument and produce a value at the same point. Like simple addition and subtractions are example of these type of operators. So these are the types of variables. Now we need to save a variable with some name so that we can call that name to use later in our code. To do that, we need to write var then the name of that variable equals to some value. This value can be any form of the data type we just looked above. What is an array and why do we need them? An array is a special variable which can hold more than one value at a time. Imagine we need to store names of all the students in our classroom. One way is to make a variable var student1 equals to name of the student1 and do this for 50 times. Or we can make a list of a student by saying var students equals to an array which contains the name of all the students. Then to know the name of the nth student, suppose 10th student, we can call students 9 as the count in an array starts from 0 in JavaScript. Very often when you write a code, you want to perform different actions for different decisions. You can use conditional statement in your code to do this. In JavaScript, we have the following conditional statement. Use if to perform a block of code to be executed if a specific condition is true. Use else to perform a code if the specific condition is false. Use else if to specify a new condition to test if the first condition is false. Furthermore, let's talk about objects in JavaScript. Objects are variables too, but objects can contain many values. Objects help to collect information together and pass it on to the code. Within the object, we save the variable using key value pair. For example, let's create an object person. We write var person equals to curly bracket. Then the first key is first name and the value is given John. Second key is last name and the value is Doe. Similarly, another key is age and the value is 50. And another key is eye color and the value is blue. Another example we can take is var course equals to within the curly bracket. Within the name key, we have JavaScript. With the start key, we have 6. And with the end key, we have 8. Now we can access the data in object in two ways. First is course.name. This will give the result as a JavaScript. Or we can use course within the square bracket. We can specify the key which we are looking for. Here in example, we have written course within the curly bracket, within the square brackets, we have given key as name. So the value we get is JavaScript. We make functions when we know that we are going to use some piece of code again and again in code. So to not just copy paste code every time, we can make functions. And to write these functions in JavaScript, we need to use function keyword, then the name of a function along with parentheses, then a curly bracket. Within these parentheses, we can give parameters for code inside the function. And the function ends when it reaches return keyword inside the code. And with this return, we can pass the variable to our main code. There are more ways to define a function in JavaScript. The first one is the anonymous function way. Here, from the definition above, as we used var, then the name of the variable, in this case we are using big number, then we are giving a value which is actually a function. We use function keyword along with the parentheses, then within the square brackets we have used variable a which is 2 and variable b which is 3. Then we have an if and else condition which says if a is greater than b, then return a, else return b. As we know, a is less than b, so else condition will be true and the returning value will be 3. Hence, at the end, we are trying to print the value or the returning value from this function. That's why we have used big number along with the parentheses, because big number is now the name of the function, and to call a function we must have a parentheses. Where on right hand side we have immediately invoke function expression. In a similar way, we have defined var big number equals to function within a parenthesis then a square curly brackets. The only difference is that now this whole thing is inside a parenthesis and the end we have a couple more parentheses. What it does is it executes the function at the same point it is being defined. So the big number is not a function anymore, rather it will take the final value. In this case, the value of b will be the value saved in a big number, which is equals to 3. So both these functions will print the same number. But the only difference is that the left one is a function and the right one is a value. JavaScript is an interpreter language. This means we do not have to compile the JavaScript source code before sending it to the compiler. An interpreter can take a raw JavaScript code and run it for you. And the browser is nothing but a JavaScript interpreter, so we can run JavaScript directly onto the browser. Let's see with an example, we will run a JavaScript Chrome code on a Chrome. This is an empty web page. To go to the JavaScript settings, we first need to go to Developer menu. To do that, we click on Inspect menu. You get terminal something like this. In these options, we must choose console. We can cross this. This is a place where you can run the JavaScript and it will run directly into the Chrome browser. First thing we can do is write the variables we just studied right now, like variable name, and this can be hello world. And to print the variable in the console, we need to write console.log and the name of the variable. We have got hello world output. Let's try variable age equals to 21. Now try to print this in our console. Name of the variable age. We have got the number 21. Let's try some variables and add some operator on it. Like variable a is 10, variable b is 20, then a variable c is equals to a plus b. And what is the value of a and plus b will go to the c. And to check that, we can use console.log and print the value of c. As it should be 30 and it is 30. Let us write some function. So to write a function, we just have studied that we need to specify the function keyword. Then a name of function like add. We can use two variables, then a curly bracket, and we can return plus a plus b here. Then we close the curly bracket. Now, whenever we want to use this add function, we can directly call it using the name add. Like variable c will have an add value which can be 20, 20. Now, to confirm that the value of c is 40, we print it on the console using console.log, and we have got the value to be 40. As we studied, there are more ways to define a function. So one way was to use an expression. Let's use a variable and use a subtract variable name and define a function here. Within the parentheses, we have to give the variables a, b. Within the curly brackets, we must write the code. Here, it can be a minus b. Then end the curly bracket. Now the variable name sb will run the function. We can verify that using variable c equals to sb and say 10, 5. Now print the value of c. We must get 5 and it is 5. We also learned about immediately invoked functions. So let us try to create that. We can do that using our variable c, then Starting with the parentheses, we need to define a function. Now, the function must not take any variables inside it, as in the end it will be a value. So next we start with a curly bracket. We define a variable a equals to 10, then a variable b equals to 30, then we return a into b. Then we close the curly bracket and we close the another parentheses. And now to invoke this, we again use a parentheses. Now let's check what is a C. As it should have been, the C is a number because we return the number and it was immediately invoked function. That's why the value of C is now 600.